My son stood up at his own promotion party. Champagne glass raised. 40 guests watching him. He gestured at my table. "My old man should probably sit this one down," he said, "before he embarrasses himself trying to talk business with my new partners." The room laughed. Not cruelly. Just easy. The kind of laugh that costs the person being laughed at more than it costs anyone laughing. I did not raise my voice. I set my coffee down on the linen tablecloth. I nodded once, at nobody in particular. I walked out through the side door onto the back patio. The night air was cold. Good. I've been quiet a long time about what I actually built. 41 years quiet. Tonight that was going to change. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 69 years old. This story doesn't start at that party. It starts a long time before it. The party is just where it finally came due. 1983. A gravel lot behind a Sinclair station outside Toledo, Ohio. That's where Briggs Industrial Freight actually started. I was 28. My wife Eleanor was 26, 7 months pregnant with our first and only child. I had one leased freight trailer, financed with a loan my own father co-signed against his better judgment. The loan officer at First National looked me dead in the eye and told me independent freight haulers failed 70% of the time in their first 3 years. I thought about that. Then I did it anyway. Eleanor used to say she married a man who couldn't be talked out of anything once he'd decided it was worth doing. She meant it 2 ways. A compliment. A complaint. Both true, for 39 years. I drove that trailer myself. 18 months straight. I did dispatch out of a spiral notebook on the passenger seat. I slept in truck stops more nights than I slept at home. David was born in the spring of '84. I was 3 states away, hauling fasteners to a plant in Terre Haute. The load had to arrive on schedule or the next load never came. I didn't hold my own son until he was 4 days old. Eleanor never complained about that. Not once, in 39 years. She understood what those 4 days were buying. Not comfort. A foundation. Something that would still be standing long after we'd forgotten how much it cost to build. We grew slow. On purpose. 2 trailers by '86. A warehouse lease by '89. Our first union contract in '91. Not because I had to, but because Eleanor told me a business built on tired, underpaid men wasn't a business worth being proud of. By the time David hit middle school, we had 11 trucks, a real dispatch office, 3 regional manufacturers who trusted us because I showed up. Every time. On time. For a decade. That's the whole secret, if you want it. Show up. Every time. Do exactly what you said, at exactly the price you quoted. Let it compound. Slow. Invisible. Until one day you're the freight company 11 states rely on. David grew up comfortable. Private school. A company truck at 16, a used pickup off our own fleet, nothing extravagant, but his. At an age when I'd been sleeping in a truck cab trying to make a loan payment. I don't regret that. I want to be clear about that. That was the whole point of the hard years. You don't build something for 41 years hoping your child inherits the same struggle. You build it so they stand higher up. Wider view. No cliff face to claw up. What I didn't account for, what I've had a long time to think about since that patio, is that a wider view somebody else earned for you doesn't teach you what the climb actually required. David never worked a loading dock at 2 in the morning. Never sat in dispatch renegotiating a rate with a client threatening to walk. Never explained to a bank why a payment was running 9 days late. He climbed his own ladder, to be fair. MBA program I paid for outright, but he did the work himself. 2 logistics firms before he landed at Ashford Logistics Partners, out of Columbus. Vice President of Business Development at 36. Younger than almost anyone in that role in the whole industry. I was proud of him. I still am. That doesn't change what happened next. What David never knew, never once thought to ask, in 6 years of climbing, was that his father's freight company wasn't some small outfit he'd left in his rearview mirror. Briggs Industrial had grown into the largest independent freight carrier in a 3-state radius. Contracts with 4 Fortune 500 manufacturers. Operating, since 2019, under a holding structure called Meridian Transit Holdings. Tax efficiency. Liability protection. My attorney's advice, not a secret. I never hid it. He simply never asked. 6 months before that party, Ashford Logistics Partners closed the biggest acquisition in their history. The Meridian Transit Holdings contract. 70% of my entire shipping volume, across 11 states. David ran point on it. 4 months of work. Pitch, negotiation, executive presentation. The deal that would define his career. He never once asked who owned Meridian Transit Holdings. I want to sit with that for a second, because I've sat with it plenty myself. My son spent 4 months of his professional life building his career around my company. Under a name I'd used for 5 years. It never once occurred to him to look up who was behind it. I knew, of course. My operations team flagged it the day his name hit the proposal. "Walter, you're going to want to see this," one of my account managers said, sliding it across my desk. I read the whole thing that afternoon. David's name on the signature line. His photo on the bio page. The same easy, confident smile he's had since he was a boy. I made a decision that afternoon. I let the deal proceed like David was any other client. I said nothing. No preferential terms. No phone call. I told myself I was respecting the wall between us. Letting him earn it clean. There was another reason underneath that one. Quieter. Less flattering. I wanted to see if he'd ever ask. He never did. 6 months. Not one family dinner where he connected Meridian Transit Holdings to home. I told myself I wasn't disappointed. I've had a long time since that patio to admit I was lying about that. Ruth Halvorson has run Meridian's operations division for almost 30 years. Closest thing I have to a confidant in this business. She found out the same week I did. She came into my office. Closed the door. "Walter," she said. "Are you going to tell him?" "I'm not sure yet. You understand what happens if you let this run all the way to close without saying anything. He's going to find out eventually. And it's not going to feel like a coincidence. It's going to feel like you were testing him." I wasn't testing him. I was staying out of his way. Ruth looked at me a long moment. The look she's given me maybe 4 or 5 times in 30 years. "Walter, I've known you a long time. I watched you build this out of a gravel lot. I watched you sit up 3 nights straight in the '91 recession figuring out payroll. You are the most deliberate man I have ever worked for. Nothing you do is an accident. So when you tell me you're just staying out of his way, I believe you believe that. I don't believe it's the whole truth." I didn't have a good answer. I still don't. The deal closed in April. David's promotion came 6 weeks later, tied directly, in Ashford's own announcement, to landing the Meridian account. The party was the second Saturday in June. He rented the whole restaurant. 40 guests. I went with no plan to say anything. I figured I'd let it be his night. If the conversation ever turned to how the deal connected our 2 lives, I'd tell him plainly, whenever it came up naturally. It didn't come up naturally. David gave his toast around 9. Thanked his team. Thanked Ashford's leadership. Thanked his family, briefly, the way you thank people when you're 2 drinks in and feeling generous with your gratitude. Then he gestured at my table. "My dad's here too," he said. "My old man. Still thinks freight rates get set by a handshake and a firm look in the eye. probably should sit this one down before he tries to talk shop with anyone from Ashford's leadership and embarrasses himself. The room laughed. Renata Okafor, his boss, laughed right along with everyone else. 2 tables over. Easy laugh. Fond joke about a colleague's old-fashioned father. I want you to understand something about that moment. I wasn't angry about being teased. I've been teased my whole life for being old-fashioned. Eleanor teased me about the exact same thing, and I loved her for it every time. What sat wrong was the assumption underneath the joke. My son had just closed the largest deal of his career. Built entirely on my company's freight volume. And he still stood up there thinking his father was a man to be managed. Not a man worth knowing. I set my coffee down. I nodded once. I walked out onto the patio. 11 minutes of cold air, to decide what kind of father I wanted to be for the rest of that night. I stood out there a long time. Longer than 11 minutes, if I'm honest. Parking lot. Single sodium light. I thought about Eleanor. She had a phrase. Back in the early years, whenever I got frustrated with how people saw the business. Walter, you can't make people see what they haven't decided to look for. You can only make sure the truth is still standing there, patient, whenever they finally do. I thought about that phrase a lot on that patio. I'd been standing there patiently for 6 months. Waiting to see if David would ever look. I made a decision. Not out of anger. Closer to grief. The specific grief of realizing something you'd hoped for quietly simply wasn't going to happen on its own. I walked back inside. Found Renata near the bar. Walter Briggs, I said. Majority holder of Meridian Transit Holdings. Her expression changed. The way an expression changes when one fact rearranges an entire evening. Wait, she said. You're that Briggs? I am. David's never mentioned, we've spent 4 months on this account. I had no idea there was any connection at all. I told her I hadn't been sure either, until my team flagged his name 6 months ago. I told her I'd decided to let it run its course, without involving myself, because I wanted him to earn it clean. She was quiet a moment. Mr. Briggs, she said. For what it's worth, he earned it. Whatever this means for you two tonight, David closed this deal because he's genuinely good at his job. I've watched him work. Nothing about tonight changes that. I told her I appreciated her saying so. I meant it. David found us a few minutes later. Still holding his champagne. He looked between his boss and his father. I watched him understand, in real time, that the ground had shifted. I didn't raise my voice. David, I said. There's something about the Meridian account you and I need to discuss. Privately. Tonight. We stepped into a small office off the dining room. Desk. 2 chairs. A filing cabinet. I sat down across from my son the way I used to sit across from him at our kitchen table, working through algebra homework he didn't understand yet. I told him the truth. Plainly. Every dollar behind the acquisition that made his promotion possible came from a company I built 41 years ago in a gravel lot. A company he'd never once asked about in 6 months of building his career around it. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Because you never asked, David. Not once. You assumed. I let you assume, because some part of me wanted to see if you'd ever look closely enough to find out on your own. He sat with that a long time. I watched something move across his face. Not anger exactly. Something closer to a man doing math, retracing 6 months of conversations, understanding piece by piece everything he'd missed. So what happens now, he said. Are you pulling the contract? No. I'm not punishing 30 people at Ashford for a mistake that belongs to the 2 of us. I told him the contract was up for a 90-day renewal review. Standard practice. You have 90 days, I said. Not to manage my business politely from a distance. To actually learn it. Come to the warehouse. Ride with a driver. Sit in on dispatch. Understand what happens to a shipment between the dock and the destination. Because that's the foundation of everything you've been standing on your whole life without knowing it. He nodded slowly. Didn't argue. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my son looked at me like he was actually seeing something. David came to the warehouse that Monday. Not in a suit, work boots and jeans he must have bought specifically for the occasion. He shadowed Marisol Vega, our dispatch coordinator, 11 years with the company. She called me that evening. Your son asked more questions today than most new hires ask in their first month, she said. Something clicked. He came back the next week. And the week after. He rode 2 days down to Memphis with Curtis Boone, one of our long-haul drivers. 19 years with Briggs Industrial. I don't know exactly what got said in that cab across 14 hours of highway. David came back quieter than I'd seen him in years. Over dinner that Sunday, almost in passing, he told me Curtis missed his own daughter's high school graduation 8 years earlier. A shipment of medical equipment had to reach a hospital in Nashville on schedule. Curtis never mentioned it to anyone at the company until David asked him why he'd chosen this work. That conversation with Curtis taught David more than anything I could have told him myself. Some lessons only land when they come from somebody who isn't your father. By the end of the 90 days, David sat across from me at my actual desk. Going through the contract terms line by line. Real understanding this time. Real drivers. Real deadlines. Real families depending on a schedule holding together. We renewed the contract. David runs point on it now. Properly. He apologized for that night several weeks later. My back porch. 2 cups of coffee instead of champagne. Dad, he said. I've been turning that night over for weeks. I understand what I actually said up there. Not just the joke. The assumption underneath it. That you were a man to be managed instead of a man worth knowing. I'm sorry. I told him he didn't need to apologize for not knowing something I'd never told him outright. Why didn't you just tell me, he asked. The day the proposal crossed your desk. I thought about that a long moment. I think some part of me has been waiting my whole life to know if the things I built would matter to you the way they matter to me, I said. Not the money. The work underneath it. The showing up. 41 years of small, unglamorous choices that add up eventually into something worth having. I didn't know how to ask you that directly. So I let the silence ask it for me. That wasn't fair to you. I understand that now. He was quiet a while. Looking out at the yard. The same maple tree Eleanor planted the summer he was born. Tall enough now to shade half the porch some afternoons. I think I understand it now, Dad, he said. Not because you told me. Because Curtis told me. In a truck outside Nashville. About missing his daughter's graduation and never once complaining about it. That's when I understood what Meridian was actually built on. It wasn't the contract. It was Curtis. It was Marisol. It was you, 41 years ago, sleeping in a truck cab 3 states away while I was 4 days old. I didn't say much after that. Some moments don't need a father's response. They just need him to sit there, quiet, and let his son arrive at it on his own timeline. I think about Eleanor a lot on that porch. That phrase of hers. You can't make people see what they haven't decided to look for. You can only make sure the truth is still standing there, patient, whenever they finally do. Raising a son who inherits everything you built without inheriting the struggle that built it, that's its own quiet grief. You spend 41 years making sure your child never sleeps in a truck cab 3 states from home. Then you spend the back half of your life wondering if the ease cost him something you can't quite name. David found his way to it eventually. Not because I lectured him into it. Because I stepped back. Let the silence do some of the work. Trusted the truth would still be standing there when he was finally ready to look. Some lessons don't need anger behind them. They just need time. Calm isn't weakness. It's what's left after everything else burns off. I'll see you in the next one.